Good afternoon and welcome to this installment of the Lunch Series. Today we're going to be talking about diseases within row crops, and we have Dr. Heather Kelly. She is a state specialist, so she covers the entire state of Tennessee, but she is based out of the West Tennessee Research and Education Center in Jackson. So thank you for coming on and doing this program, Dr. Kelly.
Happy to do it. And so I'm going to start sharing my screen. I kind of have a mix of going over what we have for resources online, as well as kind of back and forth between a PowerPoint slide. So can you see the website right now?
Yes.
Okay, and then I'm going to toggle back and just see, can you see now the PowerPoint slide? I'm not going to put it in PowerPoint presentation though.
Yes, I can see the UT field crop resources.
Great. Okay, great. So I am the field crops pathologist for UT, and so I'm going to focus on just the field crops today, go over a little bit of cotton, and then focus mostly on corn and soybean. And I know Dr. Scott Stewart was on the last lunch session, and he did a really good job going over some of the resources available. And I like to throw this slide up there to put it in perspective of diseases. And what I always like to say is, well, when is disease a pest? And you can remember the four major factors that have to occur for a disease to be a pest. And you can use PEST as that acronym. The pathogen has to be present. You have to have the right environment. You have to have a susceptible host. And then it all has to happen at the right time for disease to become a pest. And so to address each of those factors, we have resources available for that. And so for identifying what you have in your field, the pathogen, we've got field guides that I'll be going through, as well as within that is diet management options. Environment, of course, we have publications and fact sheets that talk more in depth about each of the diseases or pathogens and what environment favors them. Susceptible host, we have our variety database that we're integrating more and more to be a searchable database, and I'll go into that when we talk about soybean. And then when in time things are actually happening, we have our newsletter blog, again, that you could subscribe to get a weekly email or follow our Twitter handle to allow you to see in the current season what we are seeing and what we are recommending. And so to go ahead and jump into our first crop, cotton. Again, here's our mobile-friendly field guide site. It's guide.utcrops.com. And so you have the different crops that we have resources for up here. And so if you go to cotton, we have our foliar diseases as well as our insect diseases, and also insect guide. And so seedling diseases, it's later in the year right now. Producers already had to make the decision whether they needed to replant or not because of seedling diseases. And then we have foliar diseases that are going to need to start being scouted for. And what I really just want to go through real quickly with you, that hopefully is helpful, is a really nice key to differentiating leaf spots. And so this has actually been made into an interactive one. And so if scouting a cotton field and you do find spots on the leaves, you can look and come to this key, interactive key, and say, okay, the borders and spots are defined by veins creating angular or geometric appearance, or are they more round, circular in appearance? We're going to say, okay, it's round. Are the spots affecting foliage throughout the plant, especially in the upper canopy, and associated with nutrient deficiencies? Then it's going to be either Symphylium, Alternaria, or Cornespora leaf spots, Cercospora leaf spots, excuse me. But if they have some concentric rings and are not associated with symptoms of nutrient deficiency, you click that one. And then spots found typically on younger plants earlier in the season where you have pepper grain like sunken structures in them, you're looking at ascochyta blight. And you could click on that to go to ascochyta blight. and find out more about it. If we go back, again, if we go back to these, or if you still are just seeing the spots with concentric rings on older plants and you're finding it on the leaves in the lower canopy, then you're looking at target spot. If you're finding these lesions with concentric rings surrounded by a halo, it says additional information is required for additional diagnosis, because really we have seen bacterial blight have a very similar appearance to target spot, but it can be throughout the foliage as well as on like a turn row. We've also seen stemphyllium as well as ascochyta blight in the upper canopy look exactly like a target spot lesion. So again, it's very important where it's being found in the canopy. But I just think that's kind of a nice interactive guide that's available when looking at cotton foliar diseases. And the big thing too is because target spot is the only one that actually responds to a foliar fungicide, especially in Tennessee, that would be recommended for a foliar fungicide. So again, for all of the disease sections, you have a general information section that'll give you more information, describe the actual symptoms you'll see. You then have your management options that'll tell you a little bit more about it. But again, here it talks about the different timings for fungicide application, and this is in regards to Tennessee. And then you have a photo gallery to give you more images of what you might be looking for. And, and so with that too, I kind of want to jump into then our news guide site. Again, when you go to it, news.utcrops.com, it'll show you what's latest been posted, but you have this search feature here that's really handy. I use it all the time. And so again, just thinking about cotton, you type in cotton disease and you see what has been posted either currently or within the past year. You can see earlier this year we talked about seedling diseases. Last year around the same time, what diseases to be on the lookout for. So again, sometimes people learn better by reading an article than going through a guide site, because they don't see any spots yet. But if they're just want to know, again, this is a good spot to read a quick article with a lot of different pictures that go over the different diseases. Even talks about the wilts and then the newer virus that is being picked up in cotton that you should be aware of. The most distinguished symptom, although there's many different symptoms that have been associated with this virus, are kind of these crumpling of the leaves, if you will, just distorted, but not to say other things couldn't also cause similar damage as this. And then, again, you can go up here. Cotton fungicide was something I had Googled earlier too. So talk about, well, if you have seen target spot in cotton before and you know a producer is interested in putting out something again. Right now, what I do is each year, I will be putting out another article this year on cotton fungicide options as they change a little bit more quickly from year to year. And really, again, only target spot is responsive to a foliar fungicide in cotton, so it's a little different than needing an entire table as we do in corn or soybean. So here in this article is where I outlined the different products that are labeled in cotton and their rates to go off of. Are there any questions so far in general or on cotton? All right. Well, I'm going to move right into corn then. And to do that, I'm going to switch sites again. And let's see, I don't know how to do that. There we go. So again, utcrops.com contains a lot of our publications as well as just additional information outside of just the field guides. It also has a bunch of quick links to the other sites I've mentioned. But so we're interested in, say, looking at corn. You go to corn, then diseases. And so here, I mainly was going to use this PowerPoint that is about to be, a lot of these images and information is about to actually be posted to the field guide site. really probably, hopefully the end of the week or next week at the latest. And so again, this will be in the same format as we saw for cotton and as I'll go over with soybean. But again, if someone likes to see it in a different format, they can always do this, print it out as a PDF, or just view it on a computer. So some of the common corn diseases we see in Tennessee, one in particular, year in, year out, on corn after corn, continuous corn, no-till acreage, is gray leaf spot. So it's caused by a fungal pathogen, Cercospora zeomatis. And so you'll notice Cercospora is a very common genus out there among different plant pathogens, but it is a completely different species than the Cercospora that can cause a leaf spot in cotton, as well as the Cercospora sogina that can cause frog eye leaf spot in soybean. But it's a common one out there. It starts in the lower canopy. There's more of these oval lesions, and then as time progresses, they then start to elongate. And zooming in, they're bordered by the veins of the leaf, so they turn into these rectangular leaf spots. And so that's one of the characteristic symptoms of gray leaf spot lesions, is being, bordered by those veins and elongating to be rectangular. It's favored by warm, wet, humid conditions. It overwinters in the corn residue, hence it's most problematic in corn after corn. And so again, we'll get to it, but knowing your hybrid is very important. There are hybrids out there that have really good disease ratings and low incidence of gray leaf spot, and then there's still also some hybrids out there that are winning yield contests that are highly susceptible to gray leaf spot. Those are the ones I use in my fungicide efficacy trial to make sure I get disease, but actually are still good yielders. So be aware of that so you can plan accordingly and know that that's what you need to be scouting for and possibly planning for a fungicide. Northern corn leaf blight is another one we can get in Tennessee. There's also southern corn leaf blight that can occur in Tennessee. We're kind of right in the middle of those two zones. Southern corn leaf blight can look very similar, but the lesions won't be near as large. It'll be smaller. And again, it's northern corn leaf blight likes at moderate temperatures, of course, a lot of humidity or moisture, and of course, infection before silking can be most damaging. I've not seen it at damaging levels in most fields in Tennessee, and have not seen a yield response to a fungicide when it comes to northern corn leaf blight, because I usually just don't see the continued infection of it. And again, to be aware, you can have multiple diseases going on in your field and on even the same leaf. Here you have northern corn leaf blight, as well as then common rust. So in common rust is one of two rusts that are important in corn. It's very important to know your differences between them, because one causes yield loss and one does not. Common rust does not cause yield loss. It's favored by cooler temperatures. The lesions are going to be more brown in color, elongated about a ½ inch, and these pustules will be on both sides of the leaf. And this is, as my predecessor used to say, Melvin Newman say, think common. Common is on both sides of the leaf. Versus southern rust, those lesions, those raised pustules, the majority of them are going to be on one side, and then the other side of the leaf is going to be smoother. Southern rust is our highest potential yield robber in corn. It's going to be usually more orange to yellow in color. It's smaller lesion or pustule sizes, and it's favored by warmer temperatures, and hence why it is can be more devastating than anything, because we're growing corn in the hottest time of the year, and it can really explode. So again, know your differences between your common rust, these pictures on the upper side of the slide, versus your southern rust on the lower side. So far this season, I've only gotten a report of common rust in Tennessee. I've not seen any southern rust. And actually, I do want to take you to, I want to go back to the, where are we at? Let's go back to here and go to corn disease. So I want to pull up where you can monitor southern rust. And so again, on July 4th, I posted an article on corn diseases and fungicides. And again, talked about some different diseases. And here was a screenshot of our southern corn rust map. So that's corn.ipmpipe.org. And if you go to that, then you would just click on corn and southern corn rust. And so here, let me zoom into the map a little bit. So you can see it has been actually reported all the way up in Clay County and Craighead County in Arkansas. And so these are still very low incidence levels. And again, that Mississippi River, Arkansas is just it's very well known. It gets southern rust much more regularly than we do on this side of the Mississippi for one reason or another. When we get rusts, usually the earliest infections, it's usually coming up through Alabama and hitting Middle Tennessee, actually where you all are at. This is the case with soybean rust. And so in my opinion, southern corn rust would be very similar. It'd be taking that similar route. Again, just usually if we would have a storm, a tropical storm, a hurricane, just come up, or that we had southern rust confirmed in these counties here, and have some storms from south to north, we're bringing those spores up. And so as of right now, we don't have any reports of southern rust in corn, but we are of the tasseling time period. So again, most of the time we've not, there's just a couple other diseases I'll go over before I talk about fungicide timing in corn. But one we see year in, year out, usually earlier in the season, is what could be called hocus spot, which is caused by a bacterial, it's a bacterial disease, or more likely, and what's most often the case, is it's paraquat remox on drift. And really what's important is both of these, it doesn't really matter which one it is, there's nothing you can do about it, and there's nothing that's needed to be done about it. Because really there's rarely any yield loss associated with this, unless really, an airplane accidentally sprayed the wrong field, with paraquat, and then that could definitely be an issue. And so I'm going to switch over to the PowerPoint to talk about some diseases I've been seeing in corn a little bit more regularly. And I forgot to do two of my cotton slides. So if you'll excuse me, we'll jump back to cotton just for 2 slides. I mainly focused on target spot, and I mentioned bacterial blight, which are foliar diseases, and bacterial blight can get on the bolls. But this is the average yield loss over our cotton acres in the US, not just Tennessee. And you can see bacterial blight is very low, a little bit of an uptick when we saw an increase in bacterial blight in 16. Similarly with target spot, 16 was a really big year for target spot. But what you see this green line is yield loss for nematode damage. And so really in cotton in particular, one of our #1 pests are nematodes. And the only way to really know if you have a nematode issue in your field and that you need to do something about it is to test your soil. And so you won't know if you need to rotate to a non-host crop, which crop is a non-host crop, and or if you want to invest in seed treatments or in-furrow applications unless you've gotten your soil tested. And so we do offer nematode testing. We can only offer soybean cyst nematode testing for free through our site here. We'll have to mail out and outsource any other kind of nematode testing as if it is for corn or cotton. And so that does come with a $15 fee per sample. But when taking a soil sample, you want to make sure the soil is moist, not dripping wet, but not dry as a bone. Obviously, you're not going to be able to get that soil probe in on our really, really dry periods. You're wanting to collect somewhere between 15 and 20 cores for every 20 acres. So approximately a core per acre, depending upon the size of the field and what you're trying to sample. Using a soil probe, push it down as far as it can go, which is usually 6 to 8 inches deep. And then place your soil sample in a sealable plastic bag and keep it cool, which just means don't throw it on the dashboard in the hot sun. If you've got a cooler, throw in a cooler, put it in the fridge overnight before you then send it off for testing. And really the best time to sample is the fall. That's going to be your highest population. And that's also when you can know for sure if you get a 0 as a result, and most likely, hopefully, they're just not there. If you test earlier in the year, especially the spring, your numbers in the field just might be lower coming out of winter, and you just might not hit the right spot with your probe to actually pick up any nematodes. Most all nematodes overwinter as eggs, which is not what's actually being screened for. The juveniles or the adult worms are what's being screened for, or with soybean cyst nematode, it's the adult female cyst's body. And those eggs, we just wouldn't capture. Well, it's not what we're looking for or able to look for in our procedures. And so in the spring, there's eggs present, but we wouldn't be scouting for them. Reniform nematode in cotton is the only one that there are some good thresholds for spring amounts, because they are the one nematode that can and will overwinter as a juvenile or an adult worm that you would actually be counting. So again, and the thing too is this is the same soil sample can be used for your nutrient analysis, but the one difference is we want to make sure you're angling your probe at a 45-degree angle coming off that row 4 to 6 inches. So when you push that probe in at a 45-degree angle, you're actually focusing on the root zone of that crop. And that's where the nematodes are going to be, around that root zone. If you just go up and down in between rows, that's not where the roots are. That's not where the nematodes are going to be. So again, previously, or when we send it off, we can get up to 14 pathogenic nematodes. It might even be up to 16 different pathogenic nematodes screened for. And previously, where we were finding soybean cyst nematode, we were doing HG type testing. We're not able to do that right now going forward. But again, if you do want to mail it to us, here's where to mail it. And even if it is the for cotton, you could still mail it to this lab, or for corn, you'd still just fill out a form to make us aware of that. And so in that form, again, is on the utcrops.com site. So again, if we go to utcrops.com, right now it's just, you'd find it under soybean, diseases and nematodes. And at the very end of the publication section, there is your nematode sampling guide and submission form. So again, here's where you would be putting the crop to be grown, the present crop and previous crop. So we would have a better idea of what you want us to screen for. And so now, sorry about that, jumping back into corn, 3 of the newer diseases that people have been seeing and talking about in corn. One is curvularia. This looks very similar to eye spot, which eye spot will be found further north in the corn belt. But in our area and going south, most likely it's usually curvularia. There's also some physiological, just leaf spot, that no pathogen has been associated with, that can look very similar to this. And so, but right now, curvularia, it's not known to impact yields. You might get a response in cleaner leaves with a fungicide, but again, it's not recommended if you're only seeing curvularia that you would need to put out a fungicide application. The other one we've been seeing a little bit more often the last 2 years is Diplodia leaf spot or leaf streak. Again, alone, it does not seem to be limiting, but the same pathogen that causes these irregular shaped lesions. Also, if you were able to zoom into these images, you'd see, again, black pepper-like structures that are the pycnidia of the fungal pathogen. So that, along with the irregular lesions, and then sometimes having that kind of inner circle there too, all indications that you're looking at Diplodia leaf streak or leaf spot. But this pathogen, there's 2 different species that can cause the leaf symptom. And one of those pathogens can cause the ear rot, and one of those pathogens can cause stalk rot. But again, the last 2 years that myself, as well as my counterpart, Kirsten Wise in Kentucky, have been observing this, we've not seen the incident level of stalk rot or ear rot increase. So again, just because you have it on the leaves doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have an issue with the stalk or the ear, but just to be aware of it. And then the last pathogen in corn that I'll mention is tar spot. And so corn right now is the only known host. It was endemic to Central and South America and Mexico, and in 2015 was the first time it was reported in the US in Indiana and Illinois. And then in 2016, Michigan and Florida. It's increased, but we have not found it in Tennessee. And yield losses from 20 to 60 bushels per acre has been reported. And so this here was the current distribution at the end of 2019. So that same site for southern corn rust, if we go back to it, if you go to the corn IPM site, that's the other pathogen right now that's being monitored. Well, and it might not be showing it to the public yet, but this is where we're also looking for tar spot. There it is there. And so again, current, right now I think these, well, that's kind of hard to tell that color difference. I think those are positive ones, no probable ones up there. And so again, there's some cool features with these maps. Again, you can compare to historical reports. No, unfortunately, it's just not working right now. Hate that, but again, this is tar spot, to be aware of it. Again, it's not been found in Tennessee due to it liking cooler conditions. I kind of doubt we're going to have to deal with it here, even though it is endemic to Central and South America. Where it's an issue in these areas is where they grow corn on mountain ranges. So higher elevation where it stays cooler than what we would see here in Tennessee. But initial symptoms of tar spot are, that's what they kind of look like, tar speckled on the leaf. But the background lesion is just brown to tan in color. And those tar spots are protruding from the leaf surface and giving the leaf a rough or bumpy feel. And so, to be aware of it, if you hear of it, you let producers know. We've not found it in Tennessee, and it's unlikely that we will, unless we're having an unusual cool year, which is definitely not the case this year in Tennessee. So, but if you do identify there's gray leaf spot or southern rust in a field, and fungicides are warranted to go out, again, one of the places you can go, we'll go back to our utcrops.com. Under corn, again, diseases, and we have our fungicide corn table. And it is updated. It just hasn't been processed through the system yet to be updated on the website, but there's very few, if any, really changes from last year's. Zoom in a little bit on it for you. And so all of these fungicide efficacy tables are group efforts. And each state can then kind of customize the table as they see fit. So a lot of times I might take diseases out, sometimes like eye spot, because I know it's not likely we would get it in Tennessee, or similarly, if they would add tar spot to this table to keep things clear and simple, for Tennessee, I might remove certain diseases. But here, it still all fits kind of nicely on a page, so it's still here across the top. It lists the different diseases. So once you know, okay, my hybrid is weak in southern rust and gray leaf spot, what are my options going out with for different fungicides? And so then you have your fungicides listed down the left-hand side, and they're grouped by their class or fungicide group. So you have your QOIs, or what's called your strobilurin products, your solo DMIs, your triazole products, and then you have your mixed modes of action. And use means unknown efficacy or insufficient data to rank at this point in time, and then your NL is not labeled. And obviously you want to be picking a product that has an E for excellent and avoiding anything that has a P for poor or F for fair, and really anything that's good and up will usually do a pretty good job in a normal disease situation. And so we have a lot of good pre-mixed mode of action products out there. And those are the ones we would recommend for fungicide resistance management. And so to be aware of that. And again, a lot of that have excellent across the board to very good when looking at the different diseases that one might want to control. Again, we also give harvest restriction days. So if someone's late getting out a fungicide application, and or also you might have to read a little bit deeper into the label just to make sure different restrictions can apply for different types of corn, like sweet corn, seed, or popcorn, as well as corn for forage or fodder. Don't necessarily use these harvest restriction days. A lot of them are similar, but some are slightly different. But to be aware of that. So a lot of them, it just varies. You do get in some 30 days ones versus 7 days when you get into the mixed mode of actions. Any questions about corn? All right, well, I'm gonna jump back to the guide site here. And again, just go to our guide.utcrops.com and jump into soybeans a little bit. Here is where it's most developed right now, where you can look at soybean seedling diseases earlier in the year. We even have environmental and planting issues and pre-emergent herbicides and fluoxapyrad, which is a levo kind of injury, as well as then if you're seeing a pod, stem, or root issue, to look here. And then of course foliar diseases, which are the main ones people are scouting for and looking for to try to decide whether they're going to spray a foliar fungicide or not. And again, for each one, when you click on it, here a lot of these they're short videos you could play that were taken at the soybean disease field day a couple years back, where I talk about, and the camera will zoom in on images of whatever pathogen I'm talking about. I might also give some information on fungicide resistance and or products. But again, most of them are all very short. Like this is 1 minute and 31 seconds. So again, a way to just learn more about it. Again, you have your management options. And so frog eye leaf spot is definitely still high on the list for yield robbing foliar pathogens. The really good thing is most of our varieties being promoted out there have some type of resistance or tolerance to frog eye leaf spot. And so again, our variety selection and knowing that is very important. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and go to our variety trials tools. And so that's search.utcrops.com. And so again, we have it for multiple different crops, but here I'm going to just click on the link for the quick search database and for soybeans. Right now it's just showing 2019 results, but you can say, well, I'm only interested in maturity group 4 late, and I know I'm only going to be buying from Asgrow, if you will, and it gives you a lot of information here. You can do it by herbicide technology, saying we know we're only going to be using anything that has an extend in it. And here actually you could click to have both years included. And then at the very bottom, if you're interested in what diseases are going on. So you might only want to look at what's low for frog eye leaf spot and target spot. And so right there I put in too many things that I might need to get rid of. And I'm just going to go ahead and just look at everything. And so there it'll populate out maturity group 4 lates from 2018 and 19 that have a low disease risk, if you will, for both frog eye leaf spot as well as target spot. And so I don't know why we do have to go to the bottom a little bit to go over a little bit. So with this tool also, when I get a question about whether I need to put out a fungicide in my soybeans or not, I'm going to ask a lot of questions first. And obviously the first one would be, well, what diseases are you seeing out there? And most of the time the answer is, well, I'm not seeing anything right now, but I'm just planning ahead. And so I said, well, okay. And so I said, well, what's the field history? Are you irrigated or not? Those things, again, will increase risk if it's soybean after soybean. If they'd seen certain diseases in the past, is good to know. And if they're irrigated, all those things can increase the risk and essentially increase the probability of a return on investment with a fungicide. The other thing I want is the variety, because here, if it was tested in the CSTs, here is the average yield response to a fungicide in this column here in bushels per acre. And so here, if they had progeny 4620 RXS, we had on average across 2 to 3 locations a response of 7.87 bushel per acre response when it came to that. And that was in, I'm not sure why this one's doubled up here for 2018. We're seeing it twice, but at least the numbers match up as they should. I don't know why, I guess maybe because I check marks 2018, it's showing 18 twice. But again, comparing then, if you look at this armor here, 46D08, we only had a response of just under 3 bushels per acre. And so again, it's something that to be mindful of. It's just another tool that can be utilized. Again, if you click on the actual variety, you can dive into the information a little bit more. So that's on average across all locations. But here you can see where at Milan, where it's always a severe disease location and it doesn't yield necessarily always as high as other locations, is where you had only 2.6 response. But here on an on-farm trial, which had moderate to severe disease, it responded 4.2. And then here, where we had a low disease pressure location, and it was planted after wheat, was only 1.5. So again, and here a lower yield in general. And so again, you can, if you know the variety and it's been in our variety trials, there's some really good data out there to provide to the producer to better help them decide what's best for their farm. And this way they can put numbers behind some of these too and kind of understand some of the probability behind there. So again, this one, again, as expected, because it's low rated for our major foliar diseases, we didn't have a high yield response, but that's not always the case, as the first example was, which was also rated low for disease, but we did actually see a response to fungicides. So to just keep that in mind, again, just a really nice tool that we're continuing to develop. Would always appreciate any feedback you have on it. If you like it, if you don't like it, what you want to see added, what you want to see go away. You know, this is the gridded view here versus then the chart view that I had it in initially, just depending on how somebody likes to view it. So getting back to some of the other diseases out there, here on the right hand side, again, it lists all the different, these are the major foliar diseases we could see in Tennessee. Our lower canopy ones, brown spot, target spot. Here, target spot is the exact same species of fungi that causes this target spot in soybean, as well as the one that causes it in cotton. Although I think eventually a taxonomist will get a hold of these and call them different species, because definitely if you take the pathogen off of cotton and try to put it on soybean in the greenhouse, it does not cause near the same amount of disease as if you take it off cotton and put it back on cotton, if you take it off soybean and put it back on soybean. If you cross them from the different hosts, they don't really do very well. So again, more efforts have been going on in my program with my PhD student Ty Smith, looking at target spot, looking at responses to fungicides if and when they're ever needed. It's going to be very highly dependent upon the variety or the cultivar being used, as well as the field history and which fungicide product would be going out. And so getting into some of our other ones, again, reasons you need to know what you're looking at: stem canker, sudden death syndrome. All of these can look very, very similar and do not respond to a fungicide. And so you want to be careful when you're identifying to make sure you're really identifying the right one, to not get it confused with a foliar disease that would respond to a fungicide. And with that too, I want to talk about a newer pathogen in soybean that has been discovered in Tennessee. and to be aware of. Goes back. Oh, where did I put it at? Here it is. Taproot decline. All right. And so here, taproot decline, you look down a row, you see yellowing leaves. Closer examination, you might say, oh yeah, that looks like stem canker or maybe even SDS. You want to pull back that plant canopy. And one of the indications you might be dealing with taproot decline is you see younger soybean leaves, some soybean plants that have completely died earlier in the season. You might also look around on your hands and knees at that debris. You might find what we call dead man's fingers. These protrusions coming out of the previous crop's debris covered in white spores. And then when you go to pull that plant up, the taproot will usually not pull out of the ground, it will break off. And looking closer at that taproot, you see the white growth of the fungus of the taproot decline species. And so this is a brand new species of Xyleria. Xyleria is a wood rotting fungus, so this species has kind of jumped over to being a pathogen. It has been reported pretty much across the entire southeast and mid-south areas. The impact on yield is still not really known, but obviously this plant's not producing. And even others next to it might have reduced pod load. And so management options are still being investigated. One of my new PhD students is going to be looking at possible interactions of this pathogen and with nematode infestation and seeing if there is any connection there or synergism on yield, if you will. And so be on the lookout for that. But again, if you see it, I'd be very interested in trying to confirm that with you, as we have found it in Fayette, Gibson, Madison, and Haywood counties in West Tennessee so far. I think it's out there more than that. We just haven't found it to report on it yet. I wouldn't be surprised if it is over in Middle Tennessee also. So to be aware of that. And something else I always like to highlight too, whether it's going to be in person with social distancing and or whether it'll be virtual, I don't know yet. But right now, we're aiming for September 10th to be the soybean disease field day. Again, approximately 8:30 to noon. In August, we'll make it official whether it will be possible to have anyone come in person or if we'll be doing it all virtually. But either way, we will be doing something on September 10th. And I'll be touring my fields in Milan, Tennessee. And that's actually where those taproot decline pictures were taken 2 years ago. And last year in the exact same spot, the exact same symptoms and pathogen were identified and seen. And so there's probably no reason why to expect it won't be there again. So again, almost all the major pathogens in soybean, you can get hands-on training with it at this field day that I do, because this is really a nice disease nursery that my predecessor built here that has not only usually really good foliar disease pressure, but then we plant all our different varieties from the CST trials here, and you get an array of all the different diseases, including the soil and stem diseases as well. And so to be aware of that, we already talked about the variety selection tool. And so thinking about chemistry for soybean, again, if we here in the guide site under management options, you can link to the PDF version of the fungicide efficacy table, or there is a mobile version that needs to be slightly updated. In general, it's not as mobile friendly as I'd like it to be, but I'm working on that. But again, looking across the top at the different diseases and then how the different products are rated, which is nice where you could organize this. So here's where all the ones that are only rated as fair, of course you'd want to avoid those, versus if you rearrange it, you could find ones that are rated very good and going down in efficacy. I do like that feature of this interactive mobile friendly table. But again, another way you can find it it is an official extension publication. So again, if you start at utcrops.com, you go to the soybean and the disease and nematodes, and we have our foliar fungicide efficacy table. And again, just as with the corn fungicide efficacy table, you have your different diseases listed across the top, and then you have your different products listed down across the left of the table, organized by their fungicide class. And so again, here you'll see the strobilurins, or the group 11s, so it would have a fungicide group 11 on the label, are all rated poor when it comes to frog eye as well as Cercospora leaf blight. This has been well documented that QOI resistance is pretty widespread across these two pathogens. Target spot, it's kind of unknown, but we've not found any in Tennessee that have had the point mutation to confer fungicide resistance. They have out of soybean in Alabama. And so it's very likely we also have probably some of that mix within our pathogen group of target spot in Tennessee. And so again, going down, you have a couple different modes of action to choose from, and of course the mixed mode of action, which is what we recommend the most. Again, this is about to be updated any day now to include some of the newer products on the market, which is mainly just the Revitec or the Veltima, which Veltima is really more promoted for corn from BASF, with Revitec being promoted in soybean. But really, again, a lot of good options for soybeans. Soybeans, it's not as hard to make a call for fungicide response and return on investment as it is for corn. Corn, it's just not always clear cut, especially with prices this year. Definitely scouting corn, knowing if your hybrid has good disease resistance, you're not irrigated, and or you're not corn after corn. I would not blame a producer for skipping the fungicide this year, particularly because it's going to be hard on the pockets with the prices of corn. Soybean, again, where we have a more consistent return on response, and we also just have more diseases that can affect yield in soybean when it comes to foliar diseases that respond to fungicides. And so with that, I think that's all I had for you all. Of course, I went a lot longer than I expected. I'm going to stop sharing now and see if there's any questions for me.
Heather, I had a question on the taproot decline. At what stage of development have they been seeing it start?
So it depends on how, really usually no one notices it until reproductive growth stages, because that's when you start to see the yellowing of the leaves, an indicator, because really those plants that died prematurely are usually shaded out and you wouldn't notice unless you're really just happen to pull the canopy back and you see that dead plant. So usually during reproductive growth stages is when then the plants surrounding that dead plant are going to start showing that yellowing. And so then it's when they start to investigate, well, what's going on during reproductive growth stages is when you then start to go down, okay, it's not stem canker, it's not SDS, and you start to find the signs that indicate that it's taproot decline.
I was also going to put a plug in for Mylan No-Till Field Day. So if you go to their website, I've got it showing right here. And if you sign up to attend, you can sign up to attend right here. But you'll get one of the Mylan No-Till hats. They send you the nice, notepad, a reminder, and an ink pen. So if you do sign up to attend, those are some nice goodies that you can take home.
Yeah, so there'll be some really good presentations. We tried to mix it up. I know my group has 3 different presentations that were recorded for Mylan No-Till, and none of them are necessarily just PowerPoint with voiceover. Most of them have somewhat of an interactive component, or you see someone in the field, or we tried to do things a slightly different way to make sure it is actually a mix-up of different things. So And yeah, the CCA, CEUs are available still by going and registering online and doing it virtually.
I didn't see any questions come in through the chat. Do we have any other questions?
I'm gonna ask a question.
All right.
I don't deal with row crop very much here in Marshall County, but I did have a couple comments back in the spring, and guys are watching these shows on TV and reading articles from these high yield guys, and they were talking about using fungicides and insecticides that are these high yield guys. They'll follow it up with like a compost or a floral feeding to kind of help that plant recover from the herbicide or the pesticide applications. Have From the data I've seen, there's not a whole lot of evidence that some of the forward feeding necessarily gives you any bushels, but what is your opinion on that? If y'all done any work on any follow up on that or not?
Yeah. So it's continued to have information out there, as you said, in some of the popular press and other locations on the high yielding. And we have started now in Tennessee our own high yielding contest. But with it too, we always like to focus on the economics behind it. And Dr. Angela McClure, and I can't remember who else was also part of some of the research that investigated, that tried to tease out, as you said, it's usually they have a whole mix of different things they're doing that claim all of it increases yield. And of course, we want to test each one of those independently to see, well, really, what is each component adding to possibly increase that yield. And so the research she found really was, as expected, that a lot of the stuff, like the foliar feeds, added little to no yield in the absence of the major components that we do recommend, like a fungicide or an insecticide when it's warranted. And so I'd have to follow up with you to know, I'm not 100% sure where those exact results are. I know in some of the presentations posted up on the utcrops.com website, you go to presentations, in some of her annual row crop review presentations, she'd have some of that in there, not necessarily the 2019 one, but the 2018 or 17 one. And similarly, I want to say they were doing similar trials in Arkansas that were published online. Again, teasing apart those different components and zeroing in on saying, well, these were really the different management practices that protected or increased yield versus what you might say is just the snake oils out there. And that's the other thing, is a lot of those times in those popular press articles, there's not statistics with them. They don't necessarily put the economics behind it. Or when they do put numbers out there, it's not that they're misleading, but it can be tricky. We had a really good speaker this past year at the Middle Tennessee and the West Tennessee Grain Conference from Purdue University. I can't quite remember his name at the moment. But it kind of said, it was something about doing something before you drink the Kool-Aid was the title of his presentation. And it was a very, very good presentation he gave at both locations. And so I believe it were recorded at least at one, if not both locations. And clearly just kind of went step by step why, kind of the checklist of what you might want to encourage producers to think about when they're looking at data, to recommending from practice or an increased practice, or to use a product or an increased seeding rate. Because sometimes there's numbers that go along with it, but when you really start to understand what they're implying doesn't make sense. Because we know if you increase the seeding rate, your yield doesn't increase with it. you have a plateau, and that's why there's a recommended seeding rate, you know. But a good marketing strategy, they can make the logic that, of course, you know, if you increase every, you know, 2,000 seeds per acre increases 4 bushels per acre, then you do the math and it makes sense. But again, you have to understand the relationship of seeding rate and yield to make sure what's being sold is accurate, or what's trying to be sold to you is accurate. And so, yeah, I would say it's still, if they really look into the data, or even try to find the data behind some of those claims, they're not there, especially the economics behind it. So hopefully that answered your question to some extent. And like I said, I know Angela did some things on it and presented on her row crops information, as well as I've read reports out of Arkansas where they investigated some of that information also.
Hey, Matt, we did that with Angela down here on the Jason Birdsong's farm. Was you here then? I can't remember. I was looking for the data. We tested about 4 products that she got, and some of it was that stuff the co-op down here pushes a lot. Some of that soil solution and those, I can't think of the Delta Ag stuff. And we didn't see any changes. We put them right beside a check, and we I mean, the yields were practically no difference. And there was a lot of interest. He said there was a lot of producers looking at that. And I've tried to go through my files here. I don't know. I had a copy at one time of our test results, and I don't remember exactly when it was done. It was probably 6 or 8 years ago, maybe. Does that sound right, Heather? She was doing some of that Go Beans work. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I don't think it'd be any older than 6 to 8 years. It might be within 4 to 8 years, but yeah. And so, yeah, it's a lot of things where we get those questions and recommendations from y'all coming through from the producers and further up and investigate it. So, yeah. And so, again, yeah, Angela's real good about also doing on-farm trial work, because I try to do that also with some of my work to show that it's not just because we're doing small plots on research centers. We'll go out to producers' fields and do large plot strips. And rarely do we get different results when comparing the small plot versus the large plot. So, yeah, and Amanda posted in the chat that, yeah, the talk was filter the Kool-Aid before you drink it. Dr. Bob Nielsen, Extension Corn Specialist and Professor of Agronomy at Purdue University. So again, if you get a chance to visit that presentation or Google him, it was a really nice, simple presentation that made a lot of sense, that I think a lot of producers would benefit from having that mindset when they're trying to filter the Kool-Aid before they drink it.
Are there any other questions before we let Dr. Kelly go back to the fields?
Hey, Heather, I assume some of that you were showing earlier, where the on the variety database, where we were going through and looking at all that stuff, where there's no information, you may have said it, I may have missed it, but where you got blanks, we just don't know anything right now. Is that correct?
Right. And so what we've tried to do is not all the varieties are in the CSTs, not all the varieties are in the OVTs, but we do have overlap with some of those varieties. And those overlaps will be where every column is filled in with information. Other varieties are only in the OVTs. So there's only certain information collected from the OVTs. And then some are only in the CSTs, and only certain information might be collected from those. And so, yeah, when there's just a blank column there, it just means maybe it wasn't in the CSTs, so I didn't get to look at the yield response with a fungicide, and or maybe rate it for a particular disease. If it has been in the CST and under other diseases there's nothing listed, that means I didn't note any other diseases in it. You know, because I'll rate frog eye leaf spot and target spot from low, moderate, and high for disease risk. based on how much disease developed in those varieties. And then I'll note if sudden death syndrome, stem canker, Cercospora leaf blight, if other foliar diseases were noted on at least 50%, if not more, of the plots. And those will be noted in the other disease column. But if I don't have any notes in the other disease column for a CST variety, then it means I didn't see any other diseases in it. So the long answer, but yeah, the short answer is if it's blank, we just don't have data on it. The exception might be the other diseases column, because it might actually be meant to be blank, that it actually didn't have any other diseases show up in it.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Kelly, for spending your lunch hour with us. We greatly appreciate the information. I know I learned, you know, a little bit today.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thanks for having me on.